Boldwood presents Chasing the Sun, written by Judy Leigh and read by Phillida Nash. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Friday the 13th of August. Whoop, whoop! Today it's my 70th birthday and I'm going to have fun. A Leo, that's me. I just looked up my characteristics. Confident, drama-adoring, loyal, fiercely protective of their nearest and dearest, generous, sunny and big-hearted, with a tendency to be reckless and rootless. That's definitely me to a T. So, 3 birthday cards just arrived in the post. One from my lovely Samantha in Cumbria, one from dear Nell. The other one's from our sister in Scotland, who must be 80 now, bless her. A new decade starts today. It's going to be brilliant. I just know it. Carpe diem. Seize the day. I can't wait to get started. Molly stopped writing, turning the turquoise diary over in her hands thoughtfully. 70. She stretched her arms above her head. A whole new decade. I wonder what I'll do. She gazed around the living room, looking at the paintings on the wall, the untidy sofa covered in cat hairs and squashed cushions, the mantelpiece crammed with knickknacks brought back from her many travels, miniature clogs, an oversized mug sporting the word Croatia, a Cora playing Gambian Jarley carved from wood, a tiny metal Eiffel Tower. 70, she murmured again, and wandered upstairs to her bedroom where she'd left the vacuum cleaner. She could vacuum up quickly before breakfast. A big birthday was a new start, as good a reason as any to clean the house. Molly scratched her head. What I really need to do is to get the chores out of the way. Then it's time for some fun. She picked up the vacuum cleaner, listening to the deafening whir of the motor, and began to shove it across a rug, singing at the top of her voice to block out the noise. Fluff had collected in straggling shreds in the corner of the room. She watched it slide into the nozzle, twizzle, and disappear. Then she paused, turning off the motor, and shook her head in disbelief. Home is where the heart is, Molly observed matter-of-factly, but my home is full of cobwebs and dust. Maybe I need a new one. Perhaps I'll move somewhere exciting. Now that would be a thing. Florida might be nice. She let the nozzle of the vacuum cleaner fall from her hand, suddenly changing her mind. August's too late for spring cleaning. I'll just change the bedding. Molly bounded towards the bed, but as soon as she glimpsed her reflection, she stopped, staring into the wardrobe mirror. A woman with a cheerful face, a mane of slate-grey hair, wearing a baggy T-shirt and loose jeans, paused for a moment too and stared back. Molly turned sideways and gazed over her shoulder. A smiling woman gazed boldly into her eyes. Molly laughed. So this is as good as it gets at 70, is it? I see. She raised her arms above her head and howled in protest, a wild, throaty yell, shaking her hair over her face. She was a strong cave woman, primitive and self-sufficient. She was fierce Boudica. She was valiant Joan of Arc. But she was still 70. She told herself she didn't care how she looked. It was too late to worry now anyway. It didn't matter. Then a new thought came to her. A brilliant idea. I don't have to be reminded every day that I'm 70. Molly rushed into the third bedroom, the one she used as an office, which was piled high with artists' materials and all sorts of once useful junk. She saw an old cricket bat standing upright in the corner, heaved it over her shoulder like a professional batsman, muttered, "How's that?" and marched back into her bedroom. There was nothing to be gained from looking at herself. She spoke directly to her reflection in the mirror. "Right," she grinned, "that mirror has got to go. I'll smash it out and leave a hole. Maybe put a colourful painting in there. Then I won't keep noticing that I'm no longer 25. That's how to start a new decade. I love the person I am, and I won't focus on small imperfections." She lifted the cricket bat high. A woman with a primitive weapon raised over her head stared back at her, dressed in a voluminous T-shirt and jeans that were 2 sizes too big, rolled up at the bottom, bare feet splaying out below. Molly smiled at the ludicrous image of herself, poised, ready to attack. Of course it would be dangerous to chop out a mirror. There would be fragments, shards, flying slivers of glass, and smashing the mirror to smithereens would not change the stark reality. She was a single, solitary 70-year-old woman who always claimed to be 65 when people asked, because age didn't matter. She never considered that pretending to be 65 would make her 2 years younger than her half-sister, Ellen Spencer, always called Nell since childhood, who was pretty, happily married, and perfect in every way. Molly knew she shouldn't care. Nobody noticed how she looked anyway. She had arrived at this point in life, and her face and body had arrived with her. It had been an interesting journey. It was a shame to destroy the mirror, Molly conceded, just because she wasn't young anymore. She would still look the same, and there would be a lot of clearing up to be done afterwards. Molly took one last look. She hardly believed how much 70 years had changed her. She still felt the same person she had been at 30, at 40, but the years suddenly seemed to have accelerated away. Molly stood sideways and pulled in her stomach, thrusting out her chest. She turned away from the mirror and smiled over her shoulder, wiggled her bottom, posed, waved an arm in the air to acknowledge her fans like a pop star. Her body wasn't as bad as she'd first thought. It was strong and solid. She posed again. She looked all right, really, she thought, if you didn't look too hard at the chin and the wrinkles. Molly shrugged, the bat dangling in her hand. Her former, prettier, younger self may have gone forever, but it had been replaced by a wiser, stronger, older woman. She had her health and her humour. She was fine as she was. Who cared? Not Molly. Not really. Not any more. Molly decided she'd put the cricket bat back in the small bedroom. Then she'd make a cup of coffee and a slice of toast with peanut butter and concentrate on enjoying her birthday. The weather outside was perfect. It was a hot summer's day. She would welcome her new decade by sharing breakfast in the garden with her cat, who definitely believed she was still young and beautiful, especially at meal times. 15 minutes later, sitting on a bench in the garden with a tray on her lap, Molly hummed a little birthday tune. She sipped strong coffee, the delicious aroma in her nostrils, and nibbled at peanut butter on wholemeal toast. Birthdays were good. She intended to have many more. She gazed over the lawn and into the neighbour's garden, where the sound of clipping suggested that Vanessa was attending to the hedge. Molly noticed her side was unkempt and overgrown, and resolved to trim it later for the sake of her pleasant, cheerful neighbour, who, despite being single now too, managed to hold down a busy job and keep her house immaculately tidy and the garden shipshape. Molly surveyed the lawn, covered in thistles and in need of a good mowing. The bird bath was broken, the shrubs were straggly and untidy, and the small cluster of fruit trees resembled a meadow. Weeds, dandelions, and daisies sprouted everywhere. She didn't mind. She had to admit that chaos suited her, and that she'd rather be chomping through a second slice of toast than attending to a rambling, disorderly garden. The thought that she and the garden were two of a kind made her smile. Vanessa popped her head over the newly clipped hedge and smiled, waving a slim bare arm. "Hi, Molly. I thought I heard you moving around. Are you enjoying the sunshine? It's beautiful out here today." Molly stretched her legs in the baggy jeans and looked down at her tanned feet, wriggling long toes. She had forgotten that it was her birthday. "I should be cutting the hedge, I suppose, but it's too nice out here to do any work." She sighed. "Besides, it's August. I can cut the hedge back in the autumn, can't I?" She offered her neighbour a hopeful look. Vanessa smiled cheerfully. She was an apple-faced, rosy-cheeked woman in her 40s, always positive despite being ditched by her serial cheat of a husband several years ago. "The hot sun doesn't bother you. You have the right skin type." She shrugged. "I just go lobster red and burn." She laughed as if having sunburn was an asset. "If you need your hedge sorting out, I'm sure I could get Jack round to do it. He's home now." "I thought your son was living in Bristol. Wasn't he at uni there?" Molly munched the last of the toast and brought the coffee mug to her lips. "He's finished. Back home now. He's found a job in Yeovil. His girlfriend is coming to live with him. She'll be looking for work too." "You'll have a house full then." Molly gazed up at the sky. The deep blue brightness made her close her eyes for a moment. "They're looking for their own place together. They don't want to stay here with me, although I've offered. It would be nice to have the company." Vanessa waved the shears in her hand. "Kids today, it's really hard for them to start out, especially in their 20s. Renting can be expensive." "I'm sure." Molly met Vanessa's eyes and smiled encouragingly. She had no idea what life was like for youngsters. Molly's daughter Samantha was in her early 50s, married to a sheep farmer in Cumbria. She rang once a week just to keep in touch, but they rarely had much to say to each other. Samantha was nothing like Molly. She was practical and sensible, like her father, Trevor. Molly pursed her lips. She hadn't thought about Trev in years. She shook her head, dispelling a misty memory of a hapless young man with huge brown eyes and a personality that was yet to be formed. They had both been too young, too eager. Then an idea occurred to her. The thought that she could help Vanessa's son and herself in one move. "Vanessa, my garden is in need of a bit more work than just the hedge. Why don't you ask Jack to pop round? If he's up for a bit of gardening at the weekend, I'm sure we can sort out something to suit us both." Vanessa's pretty face broke into a delighted smile. "Oh, that would be lovely." "He could use the extra cash. Thanks, Molly." She disappeared behind the hedge, and seconds later the clipping began again. Molly swallowed the last of the coffee and sighed. Life wasn't too bad. The sun warmed her skin. Molly felt happy. It was her birthday. She stretched her arms luxuriously. No, life wasn't all that bad on a warm August day, sitting in the garden with nothing much to do but bask in the strong sunlight. Molly thought fleetingly about her half-sister in Yeovil, 10 miles away in her tidy semi-detached house on a smart estate with its neat lawn, the car parked outside, a well-vacuumed, orderly and clean-smelling interior. They were meeting up tomorrow for dinner at Nell's place to celebrate her birthday. She adored Nell, who was a much better homemaker. Her house was always fragrant with candles or room fresheners or both. Everything was up to date and top of the range, including the huge television on the wall so that Phil could watch rugby from the huge squashy sofa, a whiskey in his hand. She compared Nell's place to her own ramshackle cottage a few miles from town, with only 2 neighbours for company. The dusty interior was cluttered with stuff she'd had for years and couldn't bear to throw away. She thought about the tattered sofa and armchair covered with multicoloured throws, the sooty wood-burning stove, the cobwebs in the corners, the array of knick-knacks from her travels, and the small television. Home was warm, comfortable, unashamedly disorganised. But then so was Molly. The Berlingo, abandoned at an angle on the gravel outside the cottage, was full of debris, recyclable shopping bags, garden implements, empty boxes of cat food. It occurred to her that, as Nell had often suggested, she ought to move somewhere modern and easy to clean. But she couldn't imagine herself in a neat house. She liked chaos. There was a scrabbling of claws on the bench next to her. A shabby ginger cat clambered onto her knee. Molly rubbed the tousled fur, scratched the crumpled ears that had been tattered in a fight with a squirrel years ago. The cat rolled on her lap, purring, and Molly flattened the top of his head affectionately with her hand. "Is it food time, Crumper?" Her voice was soothing, and the ginger cat closed his eyes, and the end of his tail twitched with excitement. Molly picked up the ragged cat and cuddled him. "All right, let's take you inside and give you some biscuits. Then I'll pop over to the Colonel and make him a sandwich." She clamped her lips together, a gesture of determination. "Afterwards, I'll have a spot of birthday lunch and maybe we can put the hammock up for the afternoon. I can finish my book and you can laze in the sun with me." 10 minutes later, Molly was puffing hard as she rushed up the hill towards Colonel Brimble-Dick's house several minutes away. She opened the little wooden gate secured with a length of twine and strode down the path that dissected the lawn to the heavy wooden door. Molly bashed the knocker, waited a few minutes and knocked again. She listened hard for any sound of the Colonel shambling through the hallway, but she heard nothing. She rapped again, thinking that if there was no response from him, she'd call the police or break down the door. She imagined peering through the living-room window, noticing the old man slumped in a chair, smashing down the door, rushing in to help, giving him the kiss of life. He'd probably wake up, open his eyes in shock, and yell at her to fetch him a stiff drink. He was 96 years old now. It was inevitable that he'd become ill one day. But 4 days ago, when she'd visited to check on him and fix his lunch, he had been as cantankerous as ever. Other than the cataracts that he said plagued him due to the hot sunlight in the Far East where he'd served in the 1960s, and being a bit slow on his legs, he was impressively fit. Colonel Brimble-Dicks said his good health was down to the whiskey he drank daily with each meal. Molly knocked again. Finally the door opened, and a thin man with sparse white hair and red-rimmed eyes glared at her. His voice, although a little throaty, was barking and loud. "For God's sake, woman! Can't a man have 15 minutes with the Daily Mail on the Causey without somebody disturbing him?" He looked up and down and shook his head.
Come in then, Polly.
Molly, Molly grinned, her face glowing with positivity, but, as ever, Colonel Brimbledick's paid no attention. The house smelled stale of over-dried washing and over-fried onions. The hall was draughty, as was the living room, where the Colonel kept his vast collection of ancient books on rickety shelves and heavily framed family portraits hung on the walls proclaiming his military ancestry. The kitchen was warmer, a little wood-fired stove in the hearth pushing out dry heat. Pegged socks and yellowing underpants hung overhead from a little string line. There was a pile of unwashed dishes in the sink. The Colonel sat down in the bucket chair at the table and picked up a half-full glass of something golden yellow that Molly fervently hoped was whiskey. He turned sharply.
I thought the other woman was coming round today, the young one, Vanessa.
No, Colonel. She'll probably pop in tomorrow. I'll give you a hand today. Has the nurse been?
She's no nurse. She's just the woman I pay to come in and do things. I get her in just so she can complain about how much I drink.
He made an indignant sound in his throat. His veined cheeks wobbled with irritation, and he stared at her through milky eyes.
Anyway, what sort of name is Amber? She's named after a traffic light setting.
She's very nice, Colonel. It's good to have someone to check how you're doing. She keeps you on your toes. He coughed, irritated.
She's in the family way. She's leaving. I'm getting another one. Jo. Probably just as bad, or worse.
He tilted his head and looked at Molly.
Since you're here, I could do with a sandwich and clean socks, and the floor needs sweeping. There are cobwebs everywhere.
Molly reached for the dustpan. If you had a vacuum cleaner, Colonel, it would make the job much easier. She began to sweep up dust mixed with errant peas. I might get you one for your birthday. He leaned forward, watching her.
I thought I'd see the other one today. Your neighbour.
Vanessa? Molly repeated as she brushed the dust and debris. She was aware of the Colonel's eyes on her as she bent over with the hand-brush.
Pretty girl, Vanessa. Don't know why her husband left her. She does a proper thick sandwich, not those thin, flapping things the wind would blow away that you make.
I always get you a healthy lunch when I pop round. She watched him bring the whiskey to his lips, his hand trembling a little. What do you want on your sandwich today? How about a nice egg mayo?
Egg what? I can't be dealing with these modern fatty foods.
He spat out the words as if they tasted horrible.
Mayonnaise and eggs? What kind of mixture is that with whiskey? I'd be violently sick.
He cleared his throat.
Beef and mustard. Beef or ham and English mustard.
I'll see what's in the fridge, shall I? Molly replied good-naturedly, but he didn't hear her. The whiskey glass was a quarter full. She lifted a dustpan and dropped the rubbish into a flip-top bin, then washed her hands under the tap. Molly's special tasty lunch coming up, Colonel.
Not milk and a cheese sandwich, Polly. All that stuff makes me bunged up and then I can't go.
Molly opened the fridge door. You're a bit low on food, Colonel. You need someone to get you a bit of shopping. She found 2 slices of ham wrapped in plastic and half a tomato. Shall I pick a few things up for you?
Vanessa orders it for me online now.
Oh, yes, I remember. He sniffed.
You're getting senile, Polly, forgetting what I've told you.
He held out the glass.
Fill this up again, will you?
Molly took the glass. How many have you had this morning, Colonel?
Never you bloody well mind. You're worse than a nagging wife.
Molly chatted as she buttered bread. Did you never want to marry, Colonel? Didn't you meet anyone special? Someone who'd be a nice wife?
No such thing as a nice wife. Harridans, all of them women. No time for any of you."
He grumbled, his face taking on an expression of someone who's just tasted something unpleasant.
"I've always managed to look after myself. The army taught me discipline and cleanliness. I don't see any point in keeping a dog and barking myself."
Molly smiled hopefully. "Really, Colonel? What about companionship and love?"
"Rubbish."
He took the sandwich she placed in front of him.
"I don't know what you're wittering about. The days of any man wanting you for much are gone. Vanessa's a pretty woman, though."
He nodded towards the glass.
"Fill it up, Polly, right to the top."
Molly opened the woodworm-riddled cupboard, finding a bottle of whisky that was almost empty. She poured the remains into a fresh glass and handed it to the Colonel. "Don't you ever feel like a change? Going on a journey? I do. All the time. I'd love a break somewhere nice. I get bored, stuck in one place for too long."
"If you say so."
The Colonel took a bite of his sandwich and chewed for a moment.
"The butter's rancid and the ham's stringy, but I suppose you did your best. I'll get it down me."
Molly sat down at the table and gazed at the old man. "Bon appetit, Colonel. I know it's only a sandwich, but you should enjoy every mouthful. That's my philosophy of life. Relish every moment. It's best to stay positive." He picked up the sandwich again and turned his rheumy eyes on her.
"Do you believe in God, Polly?"
She shrugged. "I suppose so. I don't think about it much, to be honest."
"I always wonder about it. The vicars say that God is love, but I think he has a warped sense of humour." His face was sad. "Think about it. We're born full of innocence and we grow up strong, and we have so much hope for the future. But it doesn't last. I remember wondering about that when I was in the war. Many of my men died young in battle in Borneo. Good young men. Fit. Brave men, too."
He reached for his glass.
"Women were left without husbands, children without a father, and I thought I was one of the lucky ones because I came home. But, and here's why I think God's sense of humour is twisted, now I'm not that soldier anymore. I'm nothing, just old and alone and forgotten. My legs are weak, and every day I wonder if I'll see tomorrow. Perhaps I'd have been better off dying in Sarawak with all those good young fellows."
Molly patted his hand, full of sympathy. "There is always hope, Colonel."
"Hope? You must be bloody mad, woman."
His expression was haggard.
"I remember your husband, Richard, such a pleasant, cultured man. He was lucky. He was taken in his sleep. He never knew the aches and pains of being old and alone."
"Oh, I didn't mean to upset you." Molly shook her head and turned away. It was definitely time to go. "Well, I'll get off now, Colonel Brimbledix. I'll pop in on Monday and get you some lunch."
"Hope? You must be mad."
"No, I'm just being positive. It's my birthday, and I'm going to make the most of it." Molly beamed. "I'm 70 years old today." He chortled for a moment and then barked one loud shout.
"Anus!"
Molly jerked back to face him. "Pardon?"
"I just remembered it from my school days."
His eyes were filling with water as he laughed at his own joke.
"That's the Latin word they used for an old woman, a crone."
He lifted his glass, waving it in Molly's direction.
"I thought you'd like that one."
She shrugged. "Well, it's my birthday all day today, and I'm celebrating. I'm going to treat myself to something special." Molly noticed he was staring into the distance, not interested. She took a breath. "Right. I'll see you on Monday. Take care of yourself, Colonel." As she walked into the hallway, she heard him bellow after her.
And it's neuter. Anus. No use to man or beast, old woman.
She heard him pause, a fit of coughing, and then he raised his voice.
You can bring another bottle of whiskey next time you call in, Polly.
Molly closed the door behind her, rushed down the path and through the gate, replacing the twine to secure it. Bless him, he's a sad, lonely old man, she muttered to herself as she hurried down the hill towards her cottage. Colonel Brimble Dix's last words were echoing in her ears. Molly stopped for a moment, thinking, full of sympathy for him. He had a point. Life was for living, for seizing each day, and Molly had been feeling restless. It was time for change to happen. She started to walk, accelerating into a trot, then cannoned down the hill towards her cottage, smiling and humming a little birthday tune. It was her birthday. She was going to do something new. Chapter 2. Friday the 13th of August, still. It's my birthday. 70 is no different from being 69, except that it sounds so much older. So far the day has been all right, but I need to celebrate properly. I feel the urge to be outdoors, take a long walk, do something wildly creative. The house feels too small. I need adventure. That evening Molly sat in the armchair with Crumper on her knee, the diary in her hand and a cup of tea next to her on the table. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She'd forgotten she'd promised herself a birthday lunch. She wondered about watching television. There might be a nice travel programme on, animals in far-off countries or something about nature. In her youth, she had travelled to several countries. At first it had been holidays to France with little Samantha. She'd been to the Gambia with David, and later, when she met Richie, she'd travelled through Europe and beyond, both of them relishing the experience of discovering new places. She knew the reason for her innate wanderlust was because of her mother, who had moved on soon after Molly's birth. Her parents hadn't married. In fact, Molly's mother hadn't even stayed with her and her father until Molly's first birthday, so she had no recollection of what she was like, and only knew that her name was Kezia Lovell, and that Molly had inherited her dark hair and her erratic ways. Her father had just once shown her a faded photograph of herself, a baby in a shawl, in the arms of a woman with black hair and a direct, intense gaze. He'd mumbled that he'd loved Molly's mother, but she had left him. He rarely spoke of her again, and she'd never seen the photograph since. Molly guessed that Kezia Lovell hadn't lasted long as a mother because she was unpredictable, and she assumed that she'd inherited her traits. Impetuosity, willfulness, recklessness. Her father never said as much, but she knew what her feelings were and who she took after. Molly had not been the perfect child like her half-sister Nell, who was adorable and faultless, exactly like her stepmum Jean, who had always been wonderful. She recalled Jean with a fond smile. Molly suddenly decided it would be a good idea to open some wine to celebrate her birthday. There was a bottle of Côte de Rhône in the kitchen, but Crumper was purring contentedly, and it seemed a shame to disturb him as he rolled over on his back with his legs in the air. His eyes were closed, and his back leg was twitching intermittently. He was probably dreaming about the starlings splashing in the broken bird bath. Molly reached for a book on the table next to her teacup. It was beautifully bound in turquoise silk, with a line drawing of a woman's profile in emerald stitches on the cover. She picked up her pen, chewed the end thoughtfully, and read her last entry. Wednesday, 11th of August.
Rainy today. Crumper caught a shrew and I rescued it. Watched too much TV and felt frustrated. Stuck indoors. I think I'll take up jogging. I'll get up early tomorrow and run to the signpost for Yeovil and back. That's probably almost a mile. I'll be fit as a butcher's dog, whatever that is, by the end of the summer. Molly smiled. She'd forgotten she intended to try to run a mile every day. She'd stayed in bed yesterday until after 9, listening to the radio. She lifted the pen and began to write. Friday the 13th of August continued. She contemplated the diary entry so far, her scrawl proclaiming an uneventful day, and wrote again. Today has been a strange landmark birthday. I don't mind that I've become older. It's better than the alternative, but that doesn't mean I have to be stuck in a routine. I need to up my game and not end up like the poor colonel, alone and bitter. I need more fun in my life. Now I've entered a new decade, I need a hobby. Molly sighed, closing the book with a clunk, and thought for a moment. I do need a project. She inhaled strongly, deliberately, and put the diary down. She had been keeping a diary for the last 5 years, since Richie died. It had been consolation at first, then company, a friend, someone to listen. She rubbed the ginger cat's chin. Right, Crumper. I'm going to have a glass of wine and eat something substantial to keep body and soul together. Then you and I can curl up together and watch a bit of David Attenborough. How would that be? She kissed the cat's tattered, flat forehead before pushing him from her knee and smoothing down the baggy T-shirt. Then she stood up, focused and ready for action. 20 minutes later, the kitchen was filled with the warm aroma of sizzling onions, garlic and mushrooms. Molly splashed red wine into the frying pan and added basil from a pot growing on the window ledge. Boiling water made the little tubes of penne rise in the saucepan. She slurped a mouthful of wine from a very full glass and began to sing a little song. U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Molly had a strong voice, and she sang it loudly, with abandon. She and Richie had loved U2. They had seen them in Paris in 2007, holding hands, not able to take the smile from their faces through the entire concert. Richie had loved the Edge's strong guitar sound, and Molly had adored Bono's voice. But not as much as she'd adored Richie McCracken. He'd been the love of her life, and losing him had changed everything. She was still bawling out the song as she slopped pasta onto a plate and poured more wine into the glass. She sat at the scrubbed table in the kitchen and started to eat. Crumper arrived, leaping up on the table, and he stretched out a skinny paw to steal a piece of hot pasta. Molly reached for her wine and smiled at his efforts to pilfer food, holding out a piece of pasta, blowing on it to cool it. Oh, Crumper, we were going to eat supper in front of the television. She patted the flat, furry head. I know. After this, we'll take some birthday ice cream into the living room and see if we can find a nature program, shall we? An hour later, Molly was sitting in the armchair, with her feet up in worn, furry slippers, finishing the last of the wine. Crumper was sprawled on the arm of the chair, his nose snuffling in the empty bowl of pecan caramel ice cream. Molly rubbed her stomach. I'm full. She pressed the remote to find something to watch on TV and roamed the channels disinterestedly. There was a program about people painting portraits. She watched it for a few minutes. Someone had finished a picture of a Scottish actor and got him just right, the twist of his mouth, the contemplative gaze of his eyes. Molly exhaled.
and stared at the wall above the desk. She was gazing at a painting of a naked woman standing, her arms raised in the air, dark hair over her shoulders. Her expression impetuous and joyful, the light in her eyes a luminous gaze into the distance. At the lower right-hand corner, where the woman's thigh ended, was a signature. R. McC. Ritchie had painted her in 1991, 2 years after they'd met. He had been the only one who'd ever truly understood her, and he had captured her mood perfectly in that painting. Molly stared at the picture, her hand over her face to suppress a smile. She'd been self-assured, unabashed, carefree in those days. She hadn't minded him painting her naked. He'd seen her strutting around the house with hardly a stitch on one Sunday morning, and abandoned his usual practice of painting landscapes in order to paint her. He had rendered her in an abstract way, her skin ochre, her hair so dark it was almost blue, making the whites of her eyes gleam and the irises soft. The painting did not focus solely on her capriciousness or her mischief. It was a study of her in a moment of complete trust and love, her eyes uplifted all the time. Ritchie had been so proud of it. Molly had laughed and said it made her look brazen and fat. She thought, with a shrug, that she'd be glad to be as slim as she had been. But it wasn't Ritchie who had inspired her confidence. She'd been buoyant, light-hearted and independent by nature then. He had just brought out the best in her, and she had encouraged the best in him. She had never worried about anything in those days. She had lived for the moment, happy. There was a space on the wall next to the painting. Molly glued her eyes to the blank, pale wall with a crack in the plaster as an idea came to her. She could fit a second painting. One she would create herself now, in all her glory, naked. It would complement Ritchie's painting perfectly, and it would be, Molly thought, her mind fuzzed by alcohol, a perfect way to celebrate her 70th. Painting herself could be her new project. An up-to-date portrait of Molly on the wall next to the old one would bring her into the present day. She rushed upstairs into the third bedroom, the office where Ritchie's easel and acrylic paints and canvases were still kept. There was a painting of a deer, antlers high, one eye proud and alert, the other simply sketched in pencil, the body and background still a few random lines. Ritchie had left it unfinished. Molly dragged out a large canvas and some paint, a tube of deep emerald and another lurid blue. There were no brushes to be found. Molly waved a hand, unfazed. Who needs brushes? She tugged off her clothes, flinging them out through the door onto the landing until she stood naked, cold and laughing. I can paint myself. Oh, I know. She hurried downstairs and padded into the kitchen. In a drawer she found some cling film and began to wrap it around her body like a huge adhesive bandage. Back upstairs, she squeezed the emerald paint from the tube and smeared it over the cling film, covering her torso and shoulders as far as her belly button. She slopped extra paint to the front of her body so that the protective wrap was thickly coated. Then she lay down on the canvas as heavily as possible, wriggling, making a human print. She stayed this way for almost a minute, rolling against the canvas. Then she stood up carefully and surveyed her handiwork. This body needs some work, Molly smiled as she stared at the rough impression of round, flattened breasts, a curve for the stomach and small, flimsy arms and shoulders. She placed the picture upright, turned her head to one side and scrutinized her work. It was clearly a woman's body, an impression of crushed voluptuousness. Molly dipped a finger in the lurid green paint and added a few random swishes for shoulder blades, the hint of a neck, a thumbprint for a belly button. Then she signed MM at the bottom for Molly Mitchell. She grinned. It wasn't bad. Richie would have loved it, the freedom of expression, the immediacy of it. She'd let it dry, and then tomorrow she'd hang it next to the painting Richie had done all those years ago. 2 companion paintings, a diptych. Molly then, and Molly now. For a moment she was lost in thought. All those years ago Richie had laboured over the first painting for weeks. Now she had created the companion one in under 2 minutes. Her skin was becoming cold and sticky beneath the cling film. She rushed into the bathroom and turned the shower on full, waiting for the water to steam before she leapt in. She had smudges of acrylic paint on her arms and thighs. She was about to plunge into the stream of water, cling film and all, when she heard the sound, a persistent ringing downstairs. Someone was at the front door, and by the elongated hum of the bell they were keen to be heard. Molly gasped. She hadn't time for a shower. She rushed into her bedroom, seeing the image of herself fly past the wardrobe mirror, an oven-ready chicken wrapped in shiny green cling film. She pulled her hair from the knot, as if the slate-grey mane that tumbled beyond her shoulders would somehow make her wrapped nakedness more acceptable. She tugged the dressing-gown around her body and rushed downstairs. The doorbell was still ringing. When she dragged the door open, a small woman, her hair cut in a neat blonde bob, wearing a pretty blouse and smart blue jeans, was facing her. She was carrying a handbag and a suitcase. Her eyes were puffy and red. She simply said, "Happy birthday, Molly," and burst into tears. Molly extended 2 green hands and gasped, "Nell, I wasn't expecting you today. I thought we were meeting up tomorrow. Are you all right?" She glanced over her sister's shoulder to see the silver Ford Fiesta parked outside her gate in the lane. She became aware of her sister's slumped body, the bulging suitcase, the tear-filled eyes, the wobbling chin, and she threw her arms around the smaller woman, oblivious to the shower running in the bathroom, the sticky paint squelching on her skin, and the desperate need to remove it straight away with soap and water. She hugged her visitor, breathing hurriedly, anxiety in her voice. "Nell, what on earth's happened? Come in at once. Let me put the kettle on." Chapter 3. Friday the 13th of August. I made a painting to celebrate the arrival of a new decade. Then Nell turned up out of the blue. I'm there for her 100%, poor love. Don't worry, Nell. Your big sister will try her best to sort everything out. Molly ripped off the plastic wrapping, showered quickly, scrubbed off most of the slimy green paint spattered on the sides of the cubicle, and rushed downstairs in clean pyjamas to the kitchen table, where Nell was huddled over a steaming cup of chamomile tea, dabbing her eyes, the tissues squeezed in her fist. She stared at Molly. "You have a splodge of something green on your chin." "Oh." Molly lifted a hand without thinking and rubbed hard at the skin below her mouth. "How's the tea?" Nell shrugged. "It tastes like cat's pee, but it's doing the trick and calming me down. I'm sorry, Moll." She sniffed. "I haven't brought you anything for your birthday. Everything has gone wrong." "I got your card, and it doesn't matter." Molly pushed damp hair from her face. "So what's happened? Is everything all right? Is Phil okay?" "Phil!" Nell forced a laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. Her eyes filled with huge tears immediately. She tucked the sweeping fringe behind her ear and took a deep breath. I've left him. Oh, that's awful, Nell. Molly's eyes were wide. Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. It might be forever. Nell clamped her lips tightly together. That's not a problem. Can I get you food? A sandwich? Then you can tell me all about it. I'd be sick, Molly. I'm so... Fresh tears welled up. It's really over. You sure? Molly reached out and squeezed Nell's small hand affectionately. You've been together for 40 years. How on earth has that happened? Over. In a split second. Nell dabbed at her eyes with the tissues. I can't go back now. Anyway, it's too late for that. For what? He's found someone else. No, Molly gasped. Phil's not the type. He wasn't. Nell met Molly's gaze grimly, her eyes red. He is now. I don't understand. Nell took a deep breath. He told me this evening. He met her in the coffee shop in town. She works there, a barista or a waitress, I'm not sure. She's called Nikki. It's the real thing, apparently. Molly leaned forward, her fingers rubbing her temples. But you two have always been so comfortable together. Comfortable? Nell's face contorted, a mixture of rage and resignation with a dash of gallows humour. That was the problem. Now he's met her, he knows what real love is, believe it or not. Phil said that to you? Molly's eyes were wide with amazement. Phil? Steady, sensible, stick-in-the-mud Phil? She flattened a hand over her mouth. Oh, sorry, Nell. He came home tonight and told me all about it. He said he'd leave and I could stay, but I just packed a case and walked out. Nell reached for the tea and breathed in steam. I couldn't believe it at first. It's just not like Phil. But she sipped the tea gratefully. It just shows you how wrong you can be about someone. Perhaps it's a mistake. My mistake? For trusting him, for believing we had a good marriage. He was really sorry, he said, but he loves her. He told me all about it last night. We sat at the table and he explained it to me like I was a child. He loves her. She's the one. And the worst thing... Nell clutched the teacup. She's 30 years younger than him. She's 37. No, she can't be. Molly shook her head again, disbelieving. Nell blew her nose with the tissue. When her hand came away, the tip was pink. So, it's over. I've been married to Phil for longer than his mistress has been alive. She gave a little snort. He's moving her into a house. I won't go back. Not ever. I don't want to see him. I don't want to have to talk to him. I'll never put a foot inside that house again. She's moving in. Yep, into our home, our bed. Nell swallowed the rest of the tea, pulling an unhappy face. He said at first that I should have the house and he'd move in with her. But I don't want to go in there ever again. So he said he'll buy me out after the divorce. I can find somewhere else to live. Divorce? Oh, yes, we talked about that too, Molly. That's how over Phil and I are. She ran a hand over her face and her neck, the skin starting to mottle. I don't suppose I could have a medicinal drink. Molly's heart was swollen with sadness for Nell. She slid her chair back and moved to a cupboard, taking out a bottle of brandy and 2 glasses. Medicinal? Just a small one, then? Large, please. In fact, just give me the whole bottle. Molly poured a small drink for herself and passed Nell a glass and the bottle, ruffling her sister's silky hair affectionately. Nell filled her glass with brandy, a little spilling onto the wooden table, and lifted it to her lips with shaky fingers. "So, why were you covered with green paint?" Molly shrugged. "I've been painting myself." She grinned at her joke. "New project. I'm trying to branch out." "I need a new project. In fact, I need a whole new life." Nell swallowed the drink and pulled a face. "So, can I stay here with you?" "Of course. You don't need to ask." Molly reached out and grabbed her sister's hand. "The spare bedroom's all made up." "The spare room?" Nell's chin quivered. "That's about right. I'm spare now." "Not at all. This is your home. Mi casa, tu casa." Nell had finished her brandy and began to pour herself another. "I'm glad to see you're still keeping up the Spanish classes." "No, I've forgotten most of it. It must be well over 15 years ago when Richie and I learned it together." Molly sat still for a moment, remembering them both repeating phrases, copying a nasal voice on a CD and laughing. Richie had been a natural linguist. She reached for the brandy bottle and topped up her glass. "Oh, dear, Nell. I suppose it's you and me by ourselves now, but I promise you'll be all right." Nell's eyes were glazed. "Sisters, alone, unwanted, miserable for the rest of our days." Molly shook her head, sliding the bottle just out of Nell's easy reach. "No, we won't let that happen. It's Phil's loss." She took a breath. "We can turn this around. Make it work for you. You'll see, it's an opportunity, not a disaster." "My husband dumping me for a younger woman is an opportunity? Really, Molly?" Molly was aghast. She'd said the wrong thing. "No, I don't mean that. Just, you'll be fine now. Really you will. You just need time." She looked at her sister's face, tears streaming down her blotchy cheeks, and exhaled slowly. "Time and a good night's sleep, and—" She pushed the bottle back to Nell. "And maybe just a teeny bit more brandy." An hour later, the bottle half empty, Molly helped Nell struggle upstairs, tugging her suitcase in the other hand, and deposited them both in the guest room. Then she washed her face and brushed her teeth, before ambling into her own room and snuggling under the duvet. Her mind was crammed with thoughts leaping up and down, first an overwhelming anxiety about her sister, and then her busy day, the new painting of her at 70. The reflection of herself in the mirror and the Colonel's mocking words. The red light on the alarm clock informed her that it was approaching midnight. But Molly still could not sleep. It would be lovely to have her sister to stay, and Molly was desperate to help. Nell was distraught, and Molly wondered momentarily about Phil's side of the story. An affable Yorkshireman, Phil had always been mild-mannered, honest, cheerful. Molly would never have considered him to be the roving type, and she certainly couldn't imagine him falling in love with a younger woman. He was far too pragmatic. Molly wondered if her sister had somehow got it wrong. But it wasn't the sort of thing one made a mistake about, adultery. Molly liked Phil, and it occurred to her that she should go and talk to him. It might even save her sister's marriage. Molly imagined that Nell must be feeling awful right now, alone in the guest room with her thoughts. Molly always felt loneliest at night time. She thought of Richie again. She'd hung onto the bed they had shared. She couldn't bear to part with it. The idea that somehow his DNA lurked in a fold or a seam of the mattress, that he was somehow not far away. But, of course, he was very far away. He was gone, and that was the stark reality. Molly was alone, and no matter how nice it might be to enjoy her sister's company for a while, she didn't want Nell to suffer the loneliness that was stitched permanently into the fabric of her own life. She'd become used to being by herself. She was tough, resilient, but poor Nell was made of more fragile stuff. Molly rubbed her eyes, and she was suddenly resolute. She'd get up early tomorrow and drive to Nell's house. She'd speak to Phil, and he'd see the error of his ways. Perhaps, miraculously, he might forget about Nicky from the coffee shop and beg Nell to come back to him. Then everything would be all right again. Nell would be happy. Molly sighed and closed her eyes. Chapter 4. Saturday, 14th of August. My mouth feels like the inside of a log. I drank too much brandy with Nell last night. Sadly, we weren't celebrating my birthday. Poor Nell. I think I know how to solve all her problems, though. I just want Phil to see sense. Molly checked on Nell at 9 o'clock. As she peered round the door of the spare bedroom, Nell was fast asleep, her body twisted beneath a dishevelled duvet. Downstairs, Crumper had occupied his usual place first thing in the morning, next to his dish, and was yowling for food. Molly fed him, rubbed the flattened fur, then she grabbed a banana from the fruit bowl. She'd be back home by 11:30, wake Nell and make them both coffee and lunch. Molly smiled sadly. Nell mightn't be feeling her best. She had polished off a lot of brandy. Molly glanced at her silk notebook on the small table and resolved to update it later. There were more things she needed to write down after last night. She would order her thoughts by setting them down clearly, and, hopefully, she'd have good news. She'd put up her painting, too, next to Richie's painting of her younger self, the celebration of her at 70 in all her mature emerald glory. Molly glanced out of the window. The sky was leaden and overcast, so she reached for a light coat and stepped outside. As she pushed her car keys into her pocket, she heard a friendly voice calling from over the fence. She turned and was met by Vanessa's smiling face. "You're up early, Molly?" "Just running a few errands." Vanessa smiled. "There's a silver car parked on the side of the road by your fence. Is that yours?" "It's my sister's. She's staying with me for a few days." Molly pressed her lips together. It was best not to tell Vanessa the whole story. Not yet. "By the way, Molly, did you visit the Colonel yesterday?" "I popped in and made him a sandwich." "I think he's getting grumpier." Vanessa shrugged. "He told me I was getting thin the last time I called in. He said if I stood sideways he wouldn't be able to see me." She shook her head sadly. "He went on and on about how women should have proper flesh on them, like cattle." "He tells me how lovely you are." "He's just lonely," Molly replied. "I think I'll have a word with him. I'll take him a bottle of whiskey round and have a quiet chat. I might suggest he holds back with the misogyny." She grinned. "Being nearly 100 years old and a war hero is no excuse for rudeness." "I think he's unwell," Vanessa said. "He's in a lot of pain all the time. You know how his arthritis flares up. Perhaps the anger keeps him alive." "That and the whiskey, poor man." Molly made a mental note to pick up a bottle for him later. "I think that's all he has now. It's a shame. Still, I'll point out a few ground rules. The days when women were objects for men to judge are gone. He has a new carer coming, apparently. Maybe she'll keep him in line." Vanessa gazed up at the sky. "I'm hoping the weather will lift. Jack said he'd pop round to see you later and chat about doing the garden." She beamed. "It was so kind of you to offer to let him do a few odd jobs."
It's not as if I'm going to keep the garden looking tidy by myself, is it? Molly grinned, rattling her car keys. Right. Good luck with Colonel Brimbledick's, Vanessa. Don't take any of his cheek. Vanessa gave a little laugh. I suppose it's the nearest I get to being paid any attention nowadays. She raised her voice as Molly opened the berlingo. What I'd give for a good-looking man to take me out on the town. You and me both, Molly called through the open window as she started the engine. She drove away steadily, taking the turn for Yeovil. The radio was blaring out a tinny pop song from the 1980s, but she wasn't listening. Her words were still rattling in her head. You and me both, she had said without thinking. It was a throwaway comment, but Molly wondered if it was true. Whether she would really like some male attention, whether a date would do her good. It would be nice to be flattered, to have some kindness, affection even. The thought puzzled her. She'd believed she was fine alone, but for the first time in years, since Richie had died in his sleep, she wondered if she needed someone new to spend time with. She thought briefly that she could suggest to Nell that they signed up for internet dating or speed dating. It would certainly be a project for them both. They could support each other to meet intriguing strangers. Molly grinned, thinking it might be sisterly fun to dress up, to go out on dates, to compare different men, to laugh like teenagers as they gazed at potential men friends' photographs on their phone screens and made decisions about whether to swipe left or right. She turned the car onto the main busy road. As she accelerated, she realized that dating would be a terrible idea. Nell didn't need a new man. She still wanted the one she was married to. And Molly didn't need a man either. She'd had one she'd loved beyond words, and that was that. She wouldn't bother with another. As she often said, who would want flat lemonade after sampling champagne? So instead, Molly contemplated what to say to Phil when she arrived. She was determined to be calm. She would be sympathetic, non-judgmental, but above all, she would be loyal. Poor Nell. Then, when she'd spoken to Phil, she'd have a clear idea about the next move, and she'd go home and discuss the plan of action with her sister. Molly admitted to herself, as she pulled on the handbrake outside Nell's house, Phil's house now, that she truly believed Phil was making a mistake and probably needed to have it pointed out to him. He was temporarily blinded by bubbly barista Nicky from the coffee shop, and, after a few wise words from his sensible sister-in-law, he'd realise the error of his ways and beg his wife to come home. Realistically, Molly thought, it had to be the case. Phil and Nell had been married for years. They'd had their ups and downs. In the early days they had struggled on Phil's low income as an apprentice until he became manager on the shop floor at Westlands. Nell had devoted herself to being a classroom assistant in a primary school, immersing herself in others' children in order to deal with the sadness of not being able to have one of their own. But they'd enjoyed a kind of symbiosis. Phil would always help Nell on and off with her coat. He'd always ask her if she was warm enough, drape an arm across her shoulder as they left a restaurant. They had shared the household chores, the weekly shop. They'd been on annual holidays, mostly to the Greek islands. They appeared devoted to each other. Molly sighed. None of those things meant that he loved her, of course. He was a caring partner, and they shared responsibilities. That was consideration. It wasn't love. Molly wondered now what love was, and how you recognised it amongst all the other things that filled a long-term relationship. Duty, habit, tolerance. But Molly had loved Richie, and he'd adored her. It had always been there in the fun, the laughter, the shared words, the joy of being together, even in the bickering quarrels and the hugs and kisses they'd shared afterwards.
It had broken her heart when he died, when his huge, generous heart gave way. She hadn't loved Trev, Samantha's father, but in the inexperienced rush of youth, she'd thought she loved him enough to find herself pregnant at 17. She and Trev hadn't lasted long after that. He'd been too young.